Hey drivers, we're going to take a quick look at some of the coolest things we found at the swap meet last week. It's a couple of crankshafts of the old school variety. Now when we bought them, we didn't have a great way to see exactly what the stroke was of each one of them. They could be 69 millimeters, they could be monsters. Don't really know without any markings or a great way to measure them. So that's what I'm dying to find out. Now this one is the nicer of the two and it's in better shape. So naturally, this other one is more interesting. When we take a close look at it, it's got welded counterweights on there. So it's starting to look like something DPR might do. They have a really great reputation for the work they do. And I don't know, that looks really great to me in the way that they got those things welded on there, which tells us that this is probably an OEM crank. Like this is probably a VW crank. I'm used to seeing VW on there somewhere, so not too sure about that. But if it's the case, then it's a great crank because it's forged and now it's counterweighted. We can also tell that it's first undersized. So that's 1/4 of a millimeter there, undersized. So it's down 0.010 of an inch on the journal diameter. When I move this bearing, now it's a little cold today, so it's sluggish, but I don't feel a lot of slop. This one either. In fact, we can, of course, slide off the number 4 here. And I don't see a ton of wear, or really any wear, on this bearing. So that may indicate that this thing was not run for very long, and then they lost interest, or something else went wrong with the engine, or what. But a little bit of forensics, a little bit of interesting stuff to dig up on this crank. Now we're going to measure the journal sizes, but I also want to measure the stroke. Looking at the number 2 main, I can feel a little bit of a ridge right there in the middle, which is where the groove would be on old school bearings, and thankfully we're starting to see some of those now where the oil groove is on the inside of the bearing. But that's not good, right? It's already 10 under and the journal is not totally straight. So that's something that'll probably need some attention depending on what our expectations for longevity are. We see stock rods and I don't detect a ton of slop. So once again, this thing may not have been run very much. The only bad thing I'm seeing right now is this little bump here. Everything else is looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and mic out the journals that we can get to here, really just the number 1 and number 2, and then we'll dig a little bit deeper. This is a 2 to 3 inch mic. Little bit of scoring there on that journal. So yeah, this thing's probably due for another regrind, which puts it down at 20 under. I think by then some folks have lost interest in the crank, especially if it's a big stroke going in a performance motor. Okay, that is 2. All right, we start off here. 2 inches and then all this stuff. So I see 2.1, and then we're past the second mark there by almost 5 thou. So that is 2.1548, let's say. Now I got that off of here. It's a little thicker right there. Yeah, so we're talking like a 1/10 or 2 just by feel. Taper across the journals. So it's a little skinnier here than it is here just by feel. My book says that the number 1 main through the number 3 main should be 2.1640 through 2.1648. I'm actually 2.1548. So we're on the high side of 10 under. Just like the bearing told us a little while ago, we're in pretty good shape here, at least on the number 1 main. Now while I'm in here, I'm going to notice that the rods should be just a tiny bit thicker by 4 or 5 10 thousandths of an inch. So we'll keep that in mind when we get to that step. Here's the one that doesn't look so great. So this one is thinner. I'm going to have to snug up my mic a little bit. I don't know if I can get away with this or not, so you can see what's happening. Okay, this one's too small. This is 2.153 on the dot. We're too skinny by 1/1000th of an inch. Let's hold that measurement and check up here. I'm going to flip my mic around. This little dilly-doo is in the way. That's a little slug, but I'm going to go with the worst measurement. Let's see what our ridge is. What do you bet? This is perfectly on spec, but it's the high point. Yeah, we're in great shape where that ridge is, but the rest of it is too skinny. So for any serious build, this would need to be another 10 under, and then you might argue that that's not such a serious build anymore, being at 20 undersize. I think for an engine you're not going to beat on, it'd be okay. If we were really doing this right now, we would turn everything 90 degrees and go again to measure out of round. We'd want to get the same measurements, and any variation would tell us how much of this circle is not so circular. What I'm really looking for here is what should I mark this crank before I throw it in storage. So I'm not going to worry so much about the number 4 down here. This bearing feels pretty good, so we're probably not in terrible shape. Besides, if this was going to get reground, all of them would get reground. Now to move on to stroke, there's one handy dandy way we could do this, just for a rough idea, would be to find some piston pins, stick them in there. Let's say that those are piston pins, and then measure the outsides. Now we would need to subtract the diameter of one piston pin, but there you'd have it, the stroke between two journals. So this is around the 70 millimeter mark, which is what we'd expect if it's a 69 millimeter stroke or something just barely longer. So the next step up would be 74 millimeter, but you don't really know until you check. So we're going to pull these rods off and check the crankshaft throw directly using a height gauge. If you've been following along, we hope to do kind of an engine refresh thing, but things got a little crazy. We're in between laptops, which is not good, but we've got one on the way. We'll get that one out as soon as we can. Once again, not a ton of wear on these bearings. I take that as a great sign in terms of wear, but it's really curious. Why would you put an engine together and not run it full term? Something else must have gone wrong. That number 2 main, I don't know, maybe that contributed to low oil pressure. Okay, let's see what the rod journals look like. Now remember, we want these to be about 1/2,000th thicker, or just under that. And that's 4/10. So 2.15 again, so we're 10 under on the rod journals. 4.3 or so. So we're actually just barely under spec on that one. This one's a little thicker. So that one's doing great. That's 2.1547 or so. All right, let's get these rods off. a little more wear here on the number 3 bearing. This is just another thing that I really love about swap meets, is the discovery of what you bought. You don't always have great news, but it's fun to do the forensics and try and imagine what the possibilities are for the parts that you've drug home. Boing. The number 2, about the same. Tiny scoring. So something was going on in the oil or something. And for whatever reason, it wasn't allowed to go for long. To store this thing, we will finish our measurements and then grease up all of it, really, but especially all of those journals. And then it should look about the same when we drag it out again. I'm just really looking for a basic idea on what this crank is, and we can get more detailed when we're actually building something with it. One last piece of information I'd like to have is the stroke. So let's get set up for that. The way I want to do it is set it in V blocks and use a height gauge to measure the throw at the top and the bottom. And we'll just subtract the bottom from the top, and there you go, we'll have our stroke. Okay, I've set up 2 V blocks here. They're different ones. Usually you use them in matched pairs, but what I'm trying to do is level the crank. Since the diameter of number 4 here is skinnier than number 1, we need to do something. I've put some oil on there, which is nice and goopy on this cool morning. Get our crank set in place. I don't like the way this one sounds, so just to make me feel better, I'm going to put a little grease down here. I've snugged up the V blocks so the crank is less likely to go this way. Undoubtedly, it's not perfectly level here, but I think we're going to be close enough to get a good idea. When a crank is reground, it has to be set up in the grinder really well so that all of the journals, when it's offset in the grinder, are the same distance from the grinding wheel, and then the table traverses across the wheel. That means we're introducing error. So even though we look at the crank and we say it's whatever stroke it is, each journal is bound to be a little different than the next. Now, we may be talking about 10,000ths of an inch here, or dimensions that are smaller than our measurement equipment and our methods can ever detect, but still, there's bound to be some kind of a difference. And so we're looking for anything that's just too much. I think I see why my crank sounds like it does. It's not perfectly level. So let me work on that. The other side of this V block is thinner, so I'm going to clean it up, and we might use that instead. That should raise things. Okay, that's a bit more level for us. Now here's the game. We're going to measure the height to our non-official surface plate down here. From the top of the journal with the throw at its highest point. Then we'll rotate around, take the same measurement from now the new top of the journal at its lowest point, and the distance between those 2 points is our stroke. Now, the trick is to get it perfectly straight up and down, which we won't do, and then perfectly down, again, which we won't do. So I'm going to be most of the error here. A much better way to do this would be to use a surface plate and set up basically the same. All right, so there's 0. My dial is on 0. I'm going to come up and try to get my crank pointed straight up and take my measurement. And I get 6.0835. That number in and of itself isn't significant. What we're really looking for is the difference between that number and what it is all the way down. I'll keep my height gauge right where it is. Really should have pulled out the surface plate for this. The crankshaft throw is all the way at the bottom. And I get 3.3692. Okay, so that is 6.0835. I'm estimating the tenths again. Minus 3.3692. That gives me 2.7143. Now what I really want is to know that in millimeters. So a quick search of that gives me 68.94 millimeters. So we're looking at a stock stroke. Interesting to note that is a little bit low. Now that could be me being off by that much. That's not a whole lot, 1/10 of a millimeter. But all right, that confirms it. We have a stock stroke. Let's check the other one. I'm pretty sure it's not a stock stroke. It would have been a lot more fun if this one was 74 or 69.5 or something interesting like that, but that's okay. It's got these welded on counterweights, and that makes it pretty cool. That's big on the cool factor. In a build, I would go through and measure every single stroke, because if you think about it a little bit, that's going to make a difference on compression. Might take a second to crunch the numbers on that, but just think swept volume. Well, here's a pretty good indication that we're dealing with a longer stroke. My whole rig is too tall now. It's the same setup, except that we can't reach over the top of this crank journal. So we're bigger than 69 millimeters here. I have some 1, 2, 3 blocks down here. I could pull that, but then the counterweights would hit the table. So instead of messing with all that, stay with me here, we're going to raise our instrument. Again, we're not concerned about the exact values. We just want to know the difference between them. So, like, the height off the table is not important. What we want to know is the difference between the top measurement and the bottom measurement. So I have another one of these 1, 2, 3 blocks. Just for funsies, put in the chat why they call them that. Why do they call this a 1, 2, 3 block? All right, so I'm going to take this and put it underneath my height gauge, and we'll just act like nothing happened. Okay, that number is 5.2348. I know that number is smaller than what we saw before, but just keep in mind that that block is under there. Okay, our low measurement is 2.235 on the nose. That gives us 2.9998, so pretty much 3-inch stroke here. That gives us just over 76 millimeters. So we've got an odd bird here. So that's kind of a weird crank. It's a fairly common size, I guess, but it's not a popular choice because you have big crank chores to do without actually having a big crank. I think a lot of people are going to say, instead of using a 76 millimeter stroke like this one, just bump it up. Just go all the way to 82 or at least 78 point whatever it is. Okay, that's fine. I like to play around more than I like to impress people, so this is a really interesting crank to me. It also looks to be in pretty good shape. You know what we haven't done is check the journals. Let's take a quick check of that and see if maybe we have something to get excited about here. We could put some decent sized pistons and cylinders with this thing and have around a 2 liter and probably not have to hack up a case that much. So my micrometer is still set on the 10 under. And it just slides right over it. Oh, that was an oil hole. So, okay, we're dealing with probably standard journal sizes here. The journals definitely need a good polish. So we want a little meat on the bone. That is 2.1648. So that's stock. And within spec. That one feels about the same. So does that one. This one's a little rusty, and it's a little loose. So that's kind of spooky. Number 3 is a little loose. Closer to the bottom of the spec there, but that sounds like fun. So this could be part of an interesting beater build, oddball displacement, just something a little different. I love having stuff like that laying around. What I wish I had more of was time. This is what we have time for today. I got to move on to the next thing. But what I'm doing is keeping the project alive and driving the dream. I hope you'll get out into your garage and do the same thing. We'll see you next time.